So up next, we have Perry and Boring, founder and president of the Chamber of Digital Commerce, that's going to be doing a fireside chat with Representative Polis from Colorado and Representative Schweikert from Arizona. And a comment last night at dinner, I was trying to recognize John Jacobs at Georgetown and his distinguished career at NASDAQ, and I'm like, John's a force of nature. And John was quick to dodge that compliment, and he's like, well, force of nature in my dictionary has Perry and Boring's picture next to it, and I would agree. We're very lucky as a community, as a trade association, to have Perry Ann leading the charge here. She's done an amazing amount of work, and I know that because I get tons of emails at 2 and 3 a.m., and I'm kind of like, do you sleep? And she's surrounded herself with an amazing team with folks that you see around, running around up and down the stairs here, Dan Spooler, Marie Knowles, Jason Brett, and then on top of that, has surrounded herself with an amazing board of advisors, and you'll see some of those folks speaking today, and Blythe Masters and Don Tapscott and Jason Weinstein and others. So it's I want to do a round of applause and thank Perry Ann for her contributions to the chamber and this industry. So without further ado, let's get on stage.
Thank you for those introductions. And the moment we've all been waiting for.
Yeah, having a handful of politicians can't be the exciting part of the day.
Well, it's truly an honor to have both of you here with us today, not least because it gives our very diverse audience the opportunity to hear how real progress is being made in government for this industry. And also having blockchain being accepted by folks in the government is also one of the highest levels of validation we can truly receive, and you guys have accomplished that. The 3 pillars of the Chamber's mission are industry, technology, and government. And we know that when businesses, the government, and technologists can work and collaborate together, amazing things can truly happen. And that's what we see as one of the major opportunities for the Blockchain Caucus. Now, while the airwaves in the opening weeks of this new government have been jammed with all sorts of announcements, we're monitoring a whole host of what I see as this grassroots blockchain movement. And I have a laundry list, and in just the past month, I'll list out a couple of the things that we're monitoring at the Chamber. I guess the most notable being Congressman Mulvaney, one of the original co-founders of the caucus, has now been moved to the White House, and he's going to serve as the director of O&B, which is perhaps one of the most influential roles over all of the agencies. So we have a key person serving in high positions in government. IBM just announced a 2-year research agreement with the Food and Drug Administration to secure efficient and scalable exchange of health data using blockchain technology. The Department of Homeland Security just awarded 4 blockchain companies research grants for identity management and verification solutions. The U.S. Postal Service just issued an RFI for identity management and has invited several of our members to participate in that. Just yesterday at this summit, the Department of Health and Human Services held the first blockchain healthcare codeathon. And then finally, the Vice President's chief economist came and he addressed us yesterday and said that the administration sees this as an important area of the economy as well. So all of this to us has been incredibly energizing, and at the same time, I have this audience of developers and entrepreneurs, and we're also very anxious to see the next step of seeing working models in government. So let's get this started. What are the primary goals of the Blockchain Caucus? How big are your goals for this?
Well, I would say, first and foremost, to raise awareness and be a source of information for our colleagues in the legislative branch, which is extremely important. Beyond that, sort of two things. One is we're very interested in helping to facilitate the deployment of blockchain technology in federal agencies and across government. So we're very happy to continue to work with, encourage, support initiatives like some of the ones you mentioned within the agencies. And then two, there is a convening role that the federal government can play writ large, but also the legislative branch can play in terms of convening stakeholders around standard setting and other necessary activities.
He basically said it all. Look, for those of us who sort of border on that sort of techno-utopian, how do those of us who do policy not leap ahead and screw up what we don't know is coming tomorrow? Sometimes those of us who get elected, and I want to say this gently, are arrogant sometimes of what we think we know. We start heading down a direction and all of a sudden realize we've built a barrier for the next great idea. So how do you sort of act as that emissary between government, industry, academics, and the policymakers, and say there is a resource that we can provide of here's how big this idea is. It's much, and how do we help our brothers and sisters in Congress understand this isn't just about cryptocurrencies. There's this incredible world out there that's so much bigger. If you can just sort of open up your mind and start to think about all the ways documenting ownership and the flow and the chains that can come with that.
Yeah, the balance between regulation but also protecting the public and consumers is something we're always grappling with. To start the conversation, to focus on what you're mentioning in terms of facilitating use cases in government, there's a lot of areas within government that could use better transparency, better security, could be more efficient. I mean, that's almost the definition of government. So someone once told me, if you're going to eat an elephant, how do you do that? You start one bite at a time. So for our entrepreneurs in the room, for our companies in the room that are really looking to get blockchain inside the government and just in some use cases, I mean, there's a myriad we could come up with. But where do you start this process?
Well, I think, government is wound up in a lot of big data activities, a lot of data we have in almost every agency, as you indicated. I mean, it could be education, it could be transportation, it could be, obviously, SEC. I mean, so there is large amounts of data everywhere, and wherever there's large amounts of data, there's the opportunity for distributed ledgers and blockchain to be deployed in different capacities, and in most cases with private sector partners. So I think it's really across the board. And I would, look at areas, obviously the private sector folks who have to weigh in, but I mean areas that have the largest sort of net gains or biggest economic advantages from a better deployment of the data.
Congressman Swigert, any particular use cases that you're passionate about?
Look, and I may get slightly more specific. And as a much younger man, I was a coder, so obviously it means I'm warped. Okay, so to all my programmers, wasn't that appropriate? Yay! Okay, but think about this. If I came to you right now, who actually are my coders and my entrepreneurs in this area? If I came to you tomorrow and said, take a look at all the things we're doing in government. We have this bad habit of these conversations, like we were talking before. How about the regulation of financial markets? Hey, it's only a few $1 trillion. We could do that. But how about if I came to you tomorrow and said, hey, I need a solution to scheduling patients at the VA where someone in the bureaucracy can't cancel an appointment in the background without the veteran knowing. So if
Which
I
actually
did,
happened, but actually happened.
Well, I'm at Phoenix VA.
And also Fort Collins, in both of our districts it happened. So
and the elegance, and they're spending, how much money have they spent now?
$286 million.
They're trying to build, and I may not have this absolutely accurate, but $286 million on a scheduling software that you could do for a fraction of that, do it on a chain, and when someone started trying to screw with a veteran's schedule, I see the date stamp. That is a practical, simple, it would, for a couple smart coders, could take 6 weeks to put that together. That's an example of walking in and saying, here's a solution to something that both of us are seeing veterans suffer in our districts. That's turnkey. Look for those opportunities. And maybe we don't sell it as, hey, this is a blockchain solution. It's a scheduling solution that just happens to have the elegance of the date stamping and the mechanics that a blockchain provides.
And this isn't the first time I've heard you give this speech, because you gave this argument on the House floor last year, this exact same use case, and it just happened. There was a codathon going on, and someone heard it in the industry, and in about 24 hours, they had a solution already built. And I believe you've met with this company
and
as
we're
well.
actually pitching that, but it's an example of all up and down government and the interface between government, industry, academics, and just our lives. There are these sorts of actual practical solutions. And that, hopefully, is something we can do with the Blockchain Caucus, is saying it's more than this theoretical. It's now time to actually start rolling out product.
So navigating the government can be a daunting task, especially for startups. So if they have a solution, they can come to you and you can help them.
Yeah, and the other way around, I think it's part of our role to prod government agencies to look at more efficient ways of doing things. And so that's, in terms of issuing RFPs and talking introductions to private sector partners. So, I think that they sometimes need that.
Absolutely. Well, let's talk policy. In this town, there's a lot going on. Everything from the SEC to the CFTC, from the law enforcement agencies and the consumer regulators. There's a lot of different regulators who are really pulling to have jurisdiction over this technology and over this industry. What do you see as Congress's role in these policy debates?
I'm going to let you go first.
Well, first of all, it's usually good for thought leaders in Congress and as a branch for us to weigh in rather than for it to sort of settle by default, but based on who is best at fighting for their fiefdom. So I would say that. Secondly, there are implications across different areas of government. Some that come up in terms of tax treatment, in terms of international aspects. So these are things that we should be thoughtful about. We should set up the right kind of apparatus to be making these decisions. When you leave it to sort of the default, there's always the danger that different authority will be grabbed, by agencies. That's kind of the nature of the administrative branch.
I need you to actually, probably as a chamber, also go a little bit further. There is the creative destruction aspect that we've talked about. If land title tomorrow started being on the chain, are there industries out there that have done the old abstracts of titles and title insurances that see it as an economic threat? The documentation of ownership of a security, do they see it as a threat? The transfer of value. When you swipe your debit card, right now you run through our ACH system. If there's another way to transfer that value at a fraction of the cost, do people have built networks, whether it be credit or to your checking account? You have to sort of understand that every brilliant idea you have as an entrepreneur, as a coder, as government, as a regulator, there's someone on the other side that may be coming before us defending, saying their current infrastructure, their current capital that they spent building the way it's done today, and you're offering a revolution to maybe do it faster, better, cheaper. You don't think they're going to defend their current? Remember, forgive if I'm an outlier when I say this. My few years here in D.C., I found out it's always about the money. So you have to have that in your mindset. So you got to understand sometimes you're as much trying to convince a regulator saying, hey, this is safe, openness, great things. You as a regulator are going to get to see things without sort of a bureaucratic filling up file cabinet malaise. But on the flip side, you also have to understand one of the great difficulties a chamber group has is you will have competing forces in this room where your idea puts them out of business, but their business has enough resources to try to slow you down. Welcome to competitive ideas. Well, and it's the world, particularly in a world with technology being adopted. So you have to be robust with those of us who do policy, but you also have to be really robust out there in the world of commerce.
And I would say another area where we certainly use the Chamber's help would be identifying where there are statutory barriers to deployment of blockchain technology. Just because a lot of our legal code was written and might have requirements that predate blockchain, that predate other innovation, and we might very well actually need to have statutory cleanup in certain areas to even allow it to move forward. So when you identify those, let us know. Those kinds of changes, nothing's easy for Congress to do, but they're generally easier to make than substantive policy changes when we simply update kind of statutory requirements. But I think that that's an area that there's going to be, as we dig into it, need for across different data areas.
That's brilliant. Or areas where we could be proactive. Hey, let's do this definition in the Uniform Commercial Code.
That it goes across everything.
So you know the transaction you're producing. A simple example his staff and my staff have talked about. If you actually had a state or a municipality that did the documentation of ownership of a piece of real estate using a distributed ledger, can Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, Ginnie Mae issue a loan on it? We don't know.
Right.
That's an example of it's not dealing with a regulation, it's sort of dealing with a definition that we could do that, yes, this is a insurable title, and therefore you can actually put a loan on it that has a government guarantee.
And then when we dig down, we say, okay, maybe it needs a rule, which you can get easier, or maybe it needs a statutory change. Yep. And then we have to go through that process and try to get something which takes time, but we can do. So figuring out those things are going to be very important. And we obviously need your help. So, I mean, that's kind of where work with our staffs, bring it to our attention, let us know what's needed, and we can try to facilitate that.
I'm going to get into the specifics. So last Friday, after a 4-year process, the Winklevoss Gemini Exchange and their Bitcoin ETF was rejected by the SEC. Were either of you surprised by this decision?
I didn't read the application. I mean, I think, I think it would be, first of all, I would point out that it's somewhat ancillary to deployment of blockchain technology. I mean, letting people speculate on Bitcoin is a good thing. I think people should be able to buy it through an ETF. That would be nice. Although, again, I haven't read the application. I don't know what the specific objections were to it. But, I mean, other than an awareness issue, it's not what I see as central to kind of our discussion on blockchain.
Back to my idiosyncrasy. I purposely try to avoid discussions of alternative exchanges of value. Look, I'm from an economic view that I like lots of different levels of exchange of value. But my fear is every time we get close to talking about Bitcoin, we blind a lot of our brothers and sisters in Congress thinking it's about that and not understanding what a distributive ledger actually
The
can
full
mean.
picture of the technology.
Well, a good example is, I want to be a little careful I'm not breaking someone's proprietary. If you came to me tomorrow and said, I have these insurance products, how about if I needed to insure a self-driving vehicle and it has an accident? How could a chain of its information be the witness here? So here my computer code is the witness and over here it's a human. I mean, if you had to go to court to document, I mean, does that code because I know no one can mess with it because it's time-stamped and those mechanics, does that make all of a sudden solve an insurance problem on autonomous trucks that are starting to move through our parts of the country? This creativity of constantly thinking about these things and saying, here's my barrier, is there a technology solution?
Mm-hmm. Well, the main reason the SEC, the reasoning behind this is because the Bitcoin markets aren't regulated and that the majority of the exchanges are overseas. So the majority of the transactions are happening in exchanges in other countries, mostly China. Well, something we've been working on for many, many years is helping these exchanges get licensed. In the United States, it's almost impossible for an exchange to get licensed here. Reason being is they trigger the state money transmitter laws. So these exchanges, there are the on-ramps and the off-ramps into the ecosystem. So they're important, and they're being forced to go.
When you're creating a conveyance of value to underlie participation in the blockchain, which is what Bitcoin does, and which others may want to do because you want to have some kind of incentive for participation. There are aspects of our tax code and commercial code that come into play, and we want to make sure that that is allowed because it fundamentally makes sense that there might very well need to be a mechanism like Bitcoin, even within a network where there's a conveyance of value because you are utilizing your storage and processing power and bandwidth.
Right.
Be careful. You may be getting in an area that's actually even more complicated. Should there be for fintech, should it be regulated at a national level? Does that make state regulators uncomfortable? What happens when that exchange of value transfers into something that goes into your credit union account, then turns over and purchases an item? I mean, and there becomes what's the ecosystem really looking like?
Yeah, you have this dichotomy between state and federal regulation, and this industry is very much caught in between that. And the OCC has proposed their fintech charter, and we've worked with them, and our hopes is that that can be an option. But unfortunately, we saw yesterday there was a list of 30 members of Congress who are against it. I don't know if you guys have had a chance to see that or had a response to that.
I've been somewhat involved in that. I'm on the other side. I think actually we've even drafted a letter supporting it.
You did.
Through our caucus, yeah.
Yeah, but understand, my fear is the classic case. And look, this is a real problem for a lot of us sort of working through. A lot of things we allow to be regulated at the state level, whether it be insurance, money transfer, and then I come to you and say, hey, this type of technology doesn't know state lines, it doesn't know national lines.
Yeah.
So what should its disclosure look like? What should its visibility look like? One of the rules we have in our office is data, information is the most elegant regulator in society. Does a blockchain-enabled type of movement of value or resources, those things, provide a visibility? And is that visibility the better regulator than file cabinets full of paper? That's a tough cultural change.
It's a paradigm shift.
Yeah.
And I would say that's also, again, when you talk about purposes of the caucus in Congress, this would be kind of one area the blockchain caucus would participate in when we have an opportunity like that. And there might very well be kind of the status quo weighing in a different way. We would be happy to be kind of a focal point for weighing in terms of moving forward.
Thank you very much for that.
Another did with a letter for
Absolutely.
the fintech charter.
Another issue that is brewing within the industry are initial coin offerings, or ICOs. These are open source blockchain technologies that raise money from the public. They look a lot like crowdfunding, crowdsourcing models, but they're very important to this industry. In 2016, the blockchain industry raised over $200 million in ICO financings, and the industry raised about $500 million in venture capital funding. This year, it's estimated that ICOs will raise around $600 million, and VC funding will be more like $400 to $500 million. So if ICOs were regulated, which as of right now, we haven't gotten any clarity from really anyone in the United States on what the framework is for that. Do you think that would open up the door for Main Street investors and bring in more funding into the industry, or could that stifle that and potentially drive innovation overseas?
Is most of the ICO funding, isn't it already overseas?
It's kind of everywhere. But most of the ICOs are being based in Zug, Switzerland. The majority of them are in Zug.
I mean, we have maybe, and it's a kind of a separate area, but one Dave and I probably agree on. But I mean, I think our crowdfunding mechanism is too cumbersome. I think we need to open up. We did our Jobs Act.
I knew there was a reason I liked you.
I mean, then they did 900 pages of regulation, and they kind of
broke my heart.
stymied the congressional intent on the Jobs Act. So maybe we can make another go of it. And it affects, and I'm much more familiar with how it affects, conventional crowdfunding. Obviously, this is just a corollary of it. But fundamentally, it's people's own money, and they should be able to invest, small amounts of it in the startup company of their choice.
Thank you. It's very encouraging.
Okay, first top line is, back to that sort of mechanism. I believe the way we raise money for ideas is in the middle of a radical shift. Do you remember when those of you who are finance majors, do you remember when we all went to school? First you use your checking account, then your credit cards, then your family's checking accounts and credit cards, then you find Angel. Remember the whole little ladder? And today, that's much more chaotic, but there's a lot more optionality in it. Everything from whether you crowdsource this or whether you use a Reg A filing over here. There's lots of different ways. The problem is, for some of the capital raises, there are bad actors out there. How do you do a capital raise? And back to our thing of, is a regulatory environment the most elegant, or is an information flow? Mm-hmm. For a lot of us something that's really easy to understand. For crowdsourced fundraising, equity crowdsourcing, I've often been a big fan saying, hey, I think we should be regulated to have an open and public blog attached to it. The person sitting and saying, this is a really stupid idea. Hey, there's already a cupcake shop across the street. Why are you trying to capitalize another cupcake? The fact that flow of information, I believe, is much more effective than the stack of papers we file that no one actually reads.
Right. What the industry is doing with initial coin offerings or ICOs is truly beautiful, because anyone can take a great idea, put together a paper, and get their ideas out there and perhaps get funding. It can unleash a whole new wave of innovation around the world.
But how do you create sort of cultural standard between the United States and the world, whether it be our friends from Australia who are here in the room or others, saying that anyone who has a commentary about it is also able to attach that commentary to the offering? And I know that's uncomfortable because you're going to deal with trolls, you're going to deal with this, but at some point, that's the fastest way to catch a bad guy.
And reputational aspects of the founders, can perhaps conveyed even, in a crowdsourced way. So I mean, that's also going to be an important part of this too. Not that, again, of course, I'm sure we also believe there is a, criminal and fraud element of this too. You can't take somebody's money and do something other than what you said you were going to do with it and go buy a yacht with it. I mean, there's always that. But there's no harm if you're out in good faith fulfilling what you say you're going to do. And if it fails, it fails. And investors lose their money. And if it succeeds, it succeeds.
Right. Another issue that we're seeing in this industry is with the IRS. And Representative Schweikert, you're on the Ways and Means Committee, which has jurisdiction over the IRS. We recently saw a John Doe summons was served on Coinbase, and they're seeking massive amounts of customer data from Coinbase. As a member of the Ways and Means Committee, what are your thoughts?
First, from my civil libertarian side, it makes me nervous. So how do you find a world of compliance and at the same time a level of, for if you are playing by the rules, your privacy is respected? And for a lot of the transfer of value within cryptocurrencies right now, the regulators are having great difficulty because they have great visibility in whether if the money moves through an ACH system or other types of wire transfer. If it moves through SWIFT, you have multiple layers that get to see it. somewhere here we're going to have to find a harmonization of that. This is where those rules are.
Yeah. All right, switching gears onto smart contracts, and the Chamber has a Smart Contracts Alliance. We've spent quite a bit of time with you, but really the big elephant for companies that are building smart contracts platforms or looking to adopt them, like financial institutions, is are they legally binding? How is code interpreted in the law? So can contract be smart contracts be legally binding?
I would put that in the basket of we need to find out. I mean, it needs to be ruled on. It's one of those areas that may need a statutory clarification. If it does, it's the kind of thing that I'd be happy to work on, and others would. It may not, because as long as and as far as I know, I haven't been aware at least of any judgments that have come down on it. But I mean, there'll need to be some sort of test case. It needs to be clarified. There's a strong argument they're already binding, by the way. I mean, that's a strong argument.
signature.
Yeah, very strong argument. So I mean, if that's the case, we don't need to change statute.
Perhaps an opinion.
Yeah. Look, if we can have a ruling go the right way for us, because we already have some of the electronic signature statutes, but there's states like Arizona that right now in their legislature have a couple things to sort of codify the movement of use of blockchain with the smart contract. And my understanding is Arizona is moving to try to put it in their state uniform commercial code. So it's happening. It's some of the the language that will respect those types of contracts is starting to also move statutorily.
Yeah. It is very significant that we have you here in this, not only from a logistical perspective, to have you guys in the same room at the same time, but on being opposite sides of the aisle. It's very encouraging, and for us at the Chamber, something that's very important to us is keeping this a bipartisan effort and to not making blockchain partisan. As soon as you do, it's going to be difficult to get anything accomplished. And when you guys launched the caucus, and you guys did so in a very smart and prudent way by doing it with bipartisan efforts and support, you got a ton of responses. It was all over the media. You got a bunch of press about launching the blockchain caucus. Our members are very excited, but there's hundreds of them and 2 of you. So how do you take all that energy and harness it down and really benefit from all the folks who want to support the caucus and want to be a part of it?
Well, first of all, there's more than 2 of us. We have more than a dozen members now, I'm happy to say, evenly distributed between Democrats and Republicans, and there's no reason that won't continue. I mean, this is not an ideological discussion. In fact, we were talking briefly outside, but kind of the utopian aspect of people being in control of their own information is something with broad appeal on the left and the right. And I think on the left, you might market it as, you should control it instead of large corporations. On the right, you say you control it instead of the government. But either way, there's a great desire on both sides that this is something that we should empower. And we plan to grow the caucus. So, I mean, it's 12 now. We hope we're double the size within the next year with your help and with the help of all of you who have elected members of Congress and telling them the importance of this and to join the blockchain caucus. We plan on growing even more.
Look, there's genuine solutions to things in our society that, and it's more than just blockchain. It's the crowdsourcing of data and then making it safe and open, loading it up on a blockchain. But if I came to you tomorrow and said, hey, there's a way to crowdsource environmental data, and when you see something being done wrong, you move to stop it. And so it moves from being a paperwork, fill up file cabinet regulatory model to an actual action regulatory model. Is that Republican or Democrat? It's neither. It's data. It's the use of data to actually get to the goal in a much more elegant fashion. And I'm hoping that, and this is the techno-utopian thing again, that oddly enough, the use of information, whether it be crowdsourced, whether it be on a chain where you get to protect your own and have the visibility, is actually sort of that elegant solution that we've all been looking for to cross the divide.
Absolutely. All right, last question. We've come a long way in the past couple years. The industry has grown significantly. The Chamber's membership doubled just in the past year. 5 years from now, what is the caucus going to look like? What is blockchain in government going to look like? Will the next election take place on a blockchain? What are your thoughts on timelines of adoption?
Well, I have met with different groups that are looking at applying it to voter registration and voting technologies. So I think our caucus will continue to grow. I think members of Congress react to kind of what's happening and what constituents are talking about and what's happening in the field. So more and more, they're going to hear about this and what's going on. And they're going to say, what is this? I want to join this group and find out more. There'll be more asks to join it from companies in their district, but frankly also public agencies that are deploying blockchain technology. So I'm not a futurist. I mean, you guys, it's hard for anybody to predict where anything will be in 5 years. But I think it's fair to say it'll be more widely deployed. We'll have a larger caucus. Your chamber will be larger, and we'll see where we go.
That's the running joke in our offices. What are the 2 times in life you think you know everything? Do you all remember being 14 years old? And for a couple of us, the day after we get elected to Congress. So who knows?
Well, thank you, gentlemen, for joining us. It's truly an honor to have you here, and great work on launching the caucus, and we're here to support it and to continue to channel this industry to make it a supportive effort on Capitol Hill.
Thanks.
Thank you.